At that time, I must admit, I was emotionally, spiritually, physically bankrupt.
It is true. I was nobody.
And the winner is Rocky.
What Rocky did was give a lot of people hope.
I've never been more inspired for something in my life. That movie changed the world.
How does a kid who's broke, a failing actor, go on to write and star in one of the most successful, iconic films of all time?
I was mostly what is known as atmosphere. I was in the background, or the lame roles. The drunk guy that was being stepped over in the gutter. I had $106, the rent was $300, I had a pregnant wife, and a huge British dog, as a matter of fact, a bull mastiff.
Frustrated with the lackluster roles he was getting, Stallone took matters into his own hands.
I used to sit in this little apartment, a room. I was able to open up the window and close the door while sitting on the bed at the same time. I would sit there propped up in bed, and I'd go out with my big pen and legal pad and just start writing these stories. And most of them were very, very trivial.
Meanwhile, things got so dire that Stallone sold his beloved butt kiss for only $40 to make rent. So something had to work.
If I was going to go down into professional obscurity, I wanted to at least have the opportunity to say to myself, well, you tried. So that's what, I guess you might say, provoked me.
And on March 24th, 1975, inspiration struck.
Ali's expected to win this fight. Wetner is a bit of a no-hoper.
Fair shot.
Come on, fight.
Will he manage to go the full 15 rounds with world heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali?
Well, there's a big misconception about that. Everyone thinks it's, oh, I was watching Chuck Wepner fight Muhammad Ali and he knocked him down.
And Ali's down. This is incredible.
The truth is that the Ali-Wepner fight was only part of his inspiration, the other being clearly displayed in the movie itself.
Rocky Marciano. You know, you kind of remind me of The Rock. You know that? You move like him, and you got heart like he did.
Rocky Marciano, who was basically my size, had a computer fight with Muhammad Ali in 1970, and the light bulb went off. No one in Hollywood knew who Rocky Marciano was. The Wepner fight was more contemporary.
1 round to go. Wetner's tired. He's beaten. His face is a mess.
So I use that as a reference, a neighborhood loser going the distance with the champion.
Poor Chuck Wepner couldn't quite make it. Nearly collapses. What a brave challenge, though. What a brave man.
I took my particular plight as an actor and put him into a real underdog, a boxer. I couldn't get an agent and he couldn't get a manager. I had no love in my life at the time and he didn't either. That's how that came about.
Didn't you have a manager?
No, just me.
When you write about what you know, what you've lived, it tends to come naturally.
So I started to write. I tried to incorporate 3 components to the film: heart, energy, humor. It's one of those writing frenzies. And 3 days later, I came up with the script of Rocky.
And the script was exceptional. Everyone in Hollywood wanted to buy it. Given that Stallone was broke, studios expected him to take the $25K they were offering. And they were baffled when he turned them down.
When a person hasn't had that type of money, you really don't miss it. In other words, if you haven't ridden in a Rolls Royce, you don't mind bouncing around in a Volkswagen. You don't have that frame of reference. But more than that, I knew that if I sold it, even for $500,000, after the money was gone, I would become very bitter for having sold out, because my one love was to at least fail on my own terms. I wanted to see if I could act, because all these bit parts that you're talking about, you really couldn't say this kid had talent or he was just a big fake.
Stallone refused to sell unless he was allowed to star in it. And the studios? They didn't want a no-name actor. They wanted to buy the script without Stallone attached.
They were so desperate not to have you that they kept offering you increasingly large sums of money to go away.
It went up to about $265,000.
Not to appear.
And this was in 1975. That equates to $1.5 million in today's money. If you were broke, barely affording rent with a pregnant wife, and someone offered you $1.5 million, can you imagine the balls it would take to turn that down?
I don't ask
I know in the back of my mind, if I sell the script and it does very, very well, I'm going to be very, very upset. So this is one of those things where you just roll the dice and you fly by the proverbial seat of your pants. Say, all right, I got to try it. I got to just do it. I may be totally wrong, and I'm going to be taking a lot of people down with me, but I just believe in it.
United Artists ended up being Stallone's best shot.
Slowly they began to see, well, perhaps he's got something. I think that they were taking up like the pioneer spirit of it.
And ultimately agreed to make the movie, but with a catch.
It's a small movie. It was made for like 1/10 or 1/15 of what they pay in, say, a James Bond movie or Pink Panther.
Just about $1 million.
Which is what a good toothpaste commercial cost in the United States.
They said the movie's going to cost under $1 million. You got 25 days to film it.
If you go over, that's too bad. And the producers put up their mortgage, their homes, their cars, the lots, the bagels, everything was out. You know, they just put it all on the line.
When you have such a restrictive budget, it can create a lot of stress on the actors, the crew, because you can't afford to screw up a take. But when life gives you lemons, well,
the lack of money caused a lot of good things to happen. We hadn't shot Rocky and Adrian's first date yet, which was about 6 or 7 pages of yakking in a cafe. I had suggested to them that would really be the kiss of death. We decided that we'd take them ice skating, have a bunch of extras populating the rink. So we can't afford all the extras for the ice skating rink. And I said, what if the place is closed?
We're closed.
That's why there are no people there.
If you could litter on the ice, I'd appreciate it.
I think the scene is much more romantic and a lot more charm than if there were a bunch of people bumping into each other in the background.
You could also argue it created a perfect metaphor for their relationship. 2 people adrift, barely holding each other up. Another example is when Rocky is reflecting on the upcoming fight.
Jergens, the poster's wrong.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm wearing white pants with a red stripe.
And the promoter subtly undermines him.
It doesn't really matter, does it?
This originally wasn't in the script. The poster was supposed to be drawn correctly, and since they couldn't afford to redo it, they simply changed the scene. But it works. It actually enforces the underdog narrative within that part of the story. Same thing for when Stallone's robe was made too big, they couldn't afford to make another, hence another rewrite.
Adrian, you don't think this robe here is too baggy, you know?
Good luck.
The line enhanced the scene, creating the perfect contrast between Rocky's amateur status and Apollo Creed's extravagant getup. If you've seen the film, you probably remember the orange toss.
In the movie, we couldn't afford many people.
The man who threw it was not part of the movie.
So we would travel in a van with the handheld camera. I would jump at and Garrett Brown, he'd film me running. People are throwing things at me. They had no idea who I was. I was just some strange alien invader in an incredibly ugly sweatsuit running through their neighborhood. I had the orange thrown at me, and we kind of like made it work.
This was just one example of how Philadelphia became a character in the movie.
Why Philadelphia?
Well, I lived in Philadelphia when my parents got divorced, and I quit school at 15. And I actually worked along the docks driving a forklift for my stepfather's company, and I got to know that world very well. When the time came to write Rocky, I said, you know Philadelphia, you don't really know New York anymore. And it's a real tough city, and all the athletic people that are tough, and they've always been the poor nephew of New York kind of a thing. And so Philly always has a chip on its shoulder. Then I started doing some research about the Philadelphia fighter. It's a different breed. You know, Bernard Hopkins and Joe Frazier, just tough.
It needed a town that was also an underdog town.
A very gloomy industrial town, and that has gone historically down the proverbial tubes. If there was ever a miracle going to happen in America, it would happen in Philadelphia.
Sylvester and I wanted to shoot the exteriors in Philly. The producers said, no way. We can't afford to bring a union crew from LA to Philadelphia. We shoot everything in LA, period.
Imagine Rocky not being filmed in Philadelphia. It would have been a total schlocko movie.
To make it work, they had to cut a couple corners.
The idea was to film in Philadelphia as long as we could until the unions found out about it. I had to do everything kind of quietly, because what if the Teamsters found out? Prevent you from filming.
The production itself was tiny, just a handful of people, and everyone wore multiple hats. The director's non-union crew from New York was brought in at the last minute, allowing them to operate quietly and efficiently. Most of the outdoor scenes, like Rocky running through South Philly streets, were filmed on real streets, often without official permits. The crew had to move quickly to get takes before city officials noticed. Using real locations not only saved costs, the city's authentic, gritty feel gave the film its underdog identity, which helped it become so relatable and impactful for so many people.
I was obsessed with Rocky. When I was a kid, I would fast forward to round 14, like nobody's business. Why? When Apollo Creed beat the shit out of Rocky, and he kept fighting. And everybody was saying, stay the down. Apollo Creed raised his arms up in the air, turned around, thought he wanted to fight. He turns around and sees this guy getting up, and it was the face of Apollo Creed that changed my life. And he looks at him like, what the are you?
Apollo can't believe it.
I wanted to be that.
I've watched the 14th round of the Rocky 1 movie. Can't count them, but it's got to be more than 1,000 times in my life.
Come here, man. I don't want to do it. Oh, come here.
And all the turmoil in my life and the dysfunction in my family and the things I wanted to achieve, I learned to visualize in my life by watching Rocky.
The original ending was quite different than what we have now.
Adrian! I love you.
He goes the distance and he throws the fight. At the very end, he did a noble thing, but time moves on. The champion is carried out of the ring, and Rocky starts to meander through the crowd. He sees Adrian, and she gives him a slight hug, and they walk back to the locker room, and it just didn't seem very satisfying. I remember showing it to my wife. She goes, oh, I don't like it. Rocky seems so nasty, so this, so that, because I had made him very, very street-like and unrepentant.
I felt at the time that the movies I had been seeing were at an all-time low. Everything was anti-society, anti-government, anti-everything, and there was no one to root for. So I wanted to get back into the cycle of the films where morality was at the forefront.
So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting that the first thing Rocky says when he comes into the ring is like, where's your hat?
Where's your hat?
I mean, he's so into her that he doesn't care that his eyes are swollen shut, his hands are smashed, and that he's done the greatest thing in his life. Rocky never expected to win. Never. He knew it.
I can't beat him.
And I admired the character for that. We're going to knock him out, you're going to win. No, because I'm not going to win. I'm going to get destroyed.
It really don't matter if I lose this fight. It really don't matter if this guy opens my head either.
But if I can just be lucid, if I can still be standing on my feet, you know what? Then life isn't so bad.
If I can go that distance, see, and that bell rings, and I'm still standing, I know for the first time in my life, see, that I weren't just another bum from the neighborhood.
Right when I embraced her, I was sitting with John Avildsen, and we froze right on the single frame when he was looking elated. Can you imagine how great it would be just to freeze on that moment? And that's how we froze Rocky. His life will never be more rewarding than that second.
Given the legendary status of the film now, it's hard to think that it had such low expectations at the time.
I thought it was going to end up in the bottom half of a double bill in a drive-in in Alabama or something.
We didn't open the movie to a lot of theaters, I remember. Philadelphia and a few other places.
I got a copy of the New York Times, which had this terrible, terrible review. A bomb. Thumbs down. He hated the movie. I was sitting in front of the theater where it was playing and reading this review, and it was really devastating. And out of the theater comes Peter Falk, and he said, hey, congratulations. Its picture's just great. And I said, Peter, look at this terrible review. And he said, Irwin, don't look at the review. Just go inside and see. They were cheering and jumping up and down.
It was amazing.
It was an event.
I don't think anybody could envision that.
When's the last time you saw a movie where people are standing up cheering? Where grown men are crying?
That's when I realized we had made it.
What Rocky did was give a lot of people hope.
You know, I talk about Rocky. I always equated training to mental toughness. Waking up early and doing all these things. was like, wow, man, I gotta start doing that.
I was 7 when Rocky came out, and I drank raw eggs and ran around the block. I've never been more inspired.
And to all the Rockies in the world, I love you.
The film went on to be the highest-grossing film of its year and would inspire millions of people, all thanks to the guts of one man.
I would have done the whole thing for like a donut and a tuna fish sandwich. The money meant nothing. It was the opportunity to at least prove to myself.
And like Rocky, the broke kid who had nothing did prove himself, and even had enough money to buy back his beloved Butkus. I'm Adam. This is Screen Puff. If you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making it, check out this next video. And as always, thanks for watching.